Hi, I'm Linda Noble, and I'm here today with Suchitra, and she's sharing with us her learning around her compassionate systems framework.
Hello. Hello, Linda.
Hey, Suchitra, I think let's just start a little bit on the personal level. Can you tell us what drew you to this work in the very beginning? Where did your journey start?
Mm-hmm. So I was a meditator for many, many years. It's been in my family. Most people are meditators, so it came naturally to me, and I started going to these courses at a very young age. But it wasn't until 5 years ago where I went through grief that I experienced the importance of this meditation and found it to help me, and it anchored me. And it was not just the meditation, but what comes out of it, the compassion and the loving kindness that really drew me towards it. And the compassion I experienced from my meditation teacher, from my family, from my mother, from my children, it was amazing. And I wanted to give back this compassion to people. I had had so much of it, and I was experiencing it within, and I wanted to give back. And I come from a family of educators, so it felt natural to go back to academia and research compassion and do something more about it.
Beautiful. And I understand that it's taken you to many different countries.
It has. So it got me to, I found out about compassionate systems framework, which is being developed by the Center for Systems Awareness at MIT. And different people, different countries were interested in it. So my sites were, from Jordan, USA, Switzerland, Denmark, Thailand. So very, very big range of sites. Yes.
Beautiful. Mm-hmm. So if we could just jump in a little bit deeper, can you explain to some of us, what is this compassionate systems framework? What is this?
Mm-hmm. So it's a framework which allows educators or people in an organization to hold the space for everyone to be their authentic selves. So this is in very simplified words. It helps educators to be reflective practitioners, cultivate practices that can help them develop their capacity to understand the interconnected nature of humans, to feel for others like they can feel for themselves. And it starts with the self, and then goes to the other, and then for the system, and then create social fields, generative social fields that can evoke this kind of feeling and grow it.
This sounds really wonderful. It's such a huge concept. Could you bring it down for us today? Like, how might this be relevant with our work with ARA, as researchers, as educators? Are there 2 or 3 pieces that you could just in general terms speak to?
I am an educator, and I was always a meditator, but it wasn't, as an educator, I felt we were not giving our students everything. We were giving them academics and scores and putting them in a rat race, but not really preparing them for it. And mindfulness and meditation helped me in my time of need, and I was not offering that to my students. They did not have anchors that are required to deal with the mental stress, anxiety, challenges that they are facing in the technology era, and with the bullying and internet and all that is happening. And I feel that contemplative practices play a central role in education. They, it's not just about being able to anchor themselves, but also being able to help others and help the system. We are talking about climate crisis and green, and how do we move towards it if we cannot be compassionate to ourselves, to our fellow students, our friends, and then towards our planet.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. We were talking earlier before the interview, and you mentioned the idea of developing a capacity for connectedness, and you also talked about nurturing a more generative and relational social field. These are amazing ideas. Can you unpack those ideas for us right now?
So these were big concepts for me, and that's what excited me about this research. And I was invited for the introductory workshop that happened at MIT last January. And when I went there, it was 3 days of bliss, because we went through these amazing contemplative practices, check-ins, mindfulness routines, discussions, circles, the circle time. They were so deep and connecting, and we just bonded. These were people from around the world, as I mentioned, coming with different contexts, different problems, such unique situations, and all of us had so much in common, and we went through that experience. So it started with that workshop, and then I also then was a part of the Master Practitioners program, where they take you in a deeper immersion. And I've just come back from the second module of the and it's an immersion. We've been doing this together. We've been living together. From morning 7:30 till 9:30, we've been at it and discussing, and then there was also a day of silence. So this kind of practice, there is no step-by-step method, but it's this immersion and the field that they created for us that has allowed us to understand it better, explore it with our students and with other practitioners, and work on it here.
Beautiful. So you had mentioned earlier that you were involved in these different sites. Did you experience the ripple effects with the sites that you studied in terms of this nurturing and connectedness sense? Could you tell us about that?
Yes, this was very interesting. I had a very broad range of sites, and it was not just the difference in countries, but it was also where each of these schools were in their journey. So there were some who had come for that introductory workshop for the first time. They had never done that in their schools. And then there were others who had been doing it for about 3.5 years and had much experience with this kind of framework. So the answers of the less experienced practitioners were different from the ones who were more experienced. And the less experienced practitioners felt that they needed more concrete support, and they needed a little bit of a step-by-step, what is the next thing we go and do back in school? They wanted this, because we, as educators, we are so used to a written curriculum. Mm-hmm. So they needed that support. There was also, they wanted some sort of a measurement or assessment to see how they were progressing on their journey. But when I spoke to the more experienced practitioners, they were comfortable with the systems thinking tools. They'd explored it with their faculty, with their students. Their students were using it and playing around with it. And it had sort of started growing organically in their schools. So while they had a plan in place, they had allowed it to grow organically within that plan. And sometimes they had to change the plan, and they were okay with that. So I saw this marked difference between the two groups. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So yes, I'm really curious to see an illustration of that systems framework. I think that will be very helpful.
Yes, and so I have this, this was my learning. If I had to do this framework again, I would do it differently, because it's been a year since then. But in my paper, what I realized was that if, in this stock and flow, the input required for the framework was a strong base for social and emotional learning, the understanding of compassion, a strong contemplative practice. It could be any practice. There are so many out there. So a practice, the use of systems thinking tools, and usage of the sustainability goals as a curriculum, like the content. Mm-hmm. So using the sustainability goals, but not just as a content, but with that intent that we are doing this with the intent to be sustainable for ourselves and for our planet. So these were sort of the inputs, and what was achieved in the process was awareness about the self, awareness about the social system around you, and awareness of the systems. And obviously that awareness made you more aligned with the need for the sustainable development goals. And that also led to compassionate integrity, which is basically an alignment of what you think, what you feel, and how you act. So there's a complete alignment of thought, feeling, and action, which is therefore so smooth. And therefore the action is sustainability, the SDGs.
And that's the generative piece that you mentioned earlier.
Yes,
that's so
yes.
perfect. So you touched on and you just mentioned this idea of the thinking tools. How are system thinking tools used towards this end? Is there an exemplar that you could give us on that might unpack it a little bit more for us?
We might be familiar with some of the systems thinking tools like the iceberg or the ladder of connectedness or the stock and flow, as I talked about, or the mandala of systems change. But I think what resonated with me very deeply was the ladder of connectedness, where this is about relationships and what kind of relationships we have with people, and at the top of the ladder is a complete disconnect that we can experience. Sometimes we call it emotional disconnect with people, where you just don't know why they are behaving in a certain way, or we are at a state of emotional disconnect where we are sort of reacting and not getting along with colleagues, not with friends, and everything is wrong with the world. That's the emotional disconnect. And we have times of that. And then there is emphatic distress, where you see someone hurting, but you don't know how to react to it in the best possible way. So you land up doing something which is not helpful to the person or to you, so emphatic distress. And then there is in-group empathy, where us and them. We are like that, and we do all these things right, and they do it. So there is this us and them in-group empathy. And lower on the ladder is cognitive empathy, where we start doing perspective taking. So what does it look like for him? And on an intellectual level. And below that is altruistic empathy, where you start doing selfless actions for others from a place of altruism. And then there is neutral awareness, where you feel compassion, you see the suffering of others, you do your best to help them, but not yourself going down. Sometimes in trying to help others, we pull ourselves down, and they call it compassion fatigue. So compassion is a place, or neutral awareness is where you give them loving kindness. You're there for them in the best way you can. You hold the space for them to be their authentic selves. And then finally is agape, and I have experienced that moment when I had my baby girl, when I had my first child, and I was holding her, and there was this complete connection. I never thought I could feel that connection with another human, where you see yourself in the other, and you feel that love and care for the other like you would for yourself, or even more. So it's that ladder, and to constantly go back to that ladder and see, where was I in this interaction with people? Where was my level of connectivity? So these kind of tools help kids, and they are so good at pointing out that today I am here, or I'm feeling this with this person. And just to be able to articulate what they're feeling is the first step towards acceptance. And then when you know what you're feeling, you can do something about it and not be reactive about it and not be angry, and so.
Beautiful. So the beginning of the interview, you talked about the idea of ideas and thoughts and actions, and it's beautiful that they would have this ladder to really frame their language and develop a culture of compassion. So I just think I'm really excited by your work. So can you talk a little bit about evoking social feels? How can we start this evocative process? And that's really what we want to know. How can we engage in this work?
Right. So as now I am in the Master Practitioners program, and there we did this exercise where we sat with another person and helped them evoke certain times of success or happiness that they've experienced in their life through microphenomenology, where we asked them to think about that moment and really go into the details of the moment, what they felt and experienced, and live that moment to the fullest. But that is a one-on-one exercise. But what it helped us see is how this can be evoked. What I have seen with compassionate systems is that it takes time and continuous practice. But you are, through these contemplative practices and check-ins and reflections and being sensitive and using these tools, using the language, using the visuals, throughout it's an ongoing part of the day, and it's a part of the culture. You are evoking a certain kind of behavior within yourself, and therefore you are encouraging others to behave in that way. So that causes this ripple effect, and it's this. So when you go into a school like that, you experience it. You see the excitement, you see the motivation, you see the care and love. And it happens when you go to a meditation center or maybe even a place of worship. You experience a certain kind of social field which is created over years and years by people going there with a certain kind of mindset, and
Beautiful. So you mentioned mindset, and you mentioned intention earlier, and I think those ideas are very powerful. Having intention and mindset.
And the environment, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
The
And that's
culture
social
or the
field that
environment,
comes in.
yes.
Beautiful. So I thank you. Just one last thing. Is there anything that you'd like to add? Is there anything that we should leave knowing? Where's your work right now? I'm very curious to know.
Yes, so that was early last year, and since then I've been a part of the practitioners program and right in the middle of it now, and I feel that, and some of those people whom I worked with, some of the participants from the sites are still in that master practitioners program, and the ones who were new 1 year ago are now very comfortable with it and ahead on their journey. And if I had to ask them those same questions, which I have, their answers are very different. They are not so concerned about the measurement, for example, or the assessment. They know they are on track, but because their children are behaving in a certain way, their staff is behaving in a certain way, they themselves are feeling better. So they're not so worried about the assessment or the abstract nature of the framework. And I definitely see a confidence and happiness and joy.
Wow, well, what a great way to end this interview today, with joy and happiness, and wishing you well with your work at SE in India, and just want to hear more.
Thank you,
so
Linda.
much.
Thank you.